There is a specific kind of silence that isn't peace. It looks like patience. It sounds like someone who has decided not to argue. For a long time, I told myself that was the problem, that a man who didn't fight was a man who didn't care. I tested that theory for 6 months, in front of people whose opinions I said didn't matter to me, with a man I told myself I didn't need. I was so focused on what I thought his silence meant that I never asked myself what I was building with mine. By the time I understood the difference between a man who is calm and a man who is finished, the papers were already in my hands and the door was already closing behind everything I had. My name is Mara Calloway. I am 32 years old and I work as a marketing strategist at a mid-size agency where I am very good at reading people and even better at making them feel like the most interesting person in the room. I have always been like that, socially sharp, quick with a joke, the kind of woman who walks into a party and somehow ends up at the center of it without trying too hard. I used to think that was a gift. I know now it was a need wearing a costume. Daniel and I had been married for 4 years when things started to shift, and the shift was so quiet that I almost missed it entirely. On Saturday mornings, we cooked breakfast together. It was the one ritual we never dropped, no matter how busy the week had been. He always made eggs, and he always, without my asking, removed the cilantro from the herb bunch before cooking because he knew the smell bothered me. He did it every single time, without announcing it, without expecting credit. I watched him do it one morning and registered it as habit. 12 months before that, I would have registered it as love. And I am not sure when the difference between those two things disappeared on me. He also texted me the exact time he left work every day, not on my way, but something precise like leaving at 6:14, home by 6:51. And he was always within 4 minutes of what he said. Always. I stopped noticing that too, somewhere around the time I started noticing other things. The thing I started noticing was a man named Theo. We had met at a client event 14 months earlier. He was a freelance graphic designer, the kind of person who asked 2 questions about your first answer, who remembered things you said weeks later and brought them back unprompted. He was not better looking than Daniel. He was not more successful. What he was, specifically, was curious about me in a way that had texture. He listened like the next thing I said might genuinely change something for him, and I had forgotten what that felt like. Or maybe I had never fully had it, and the wanting of it had been building so quietly that I had confused it with contentment. That particular Saturday, I was sitting on the kitchen counter while Daniel cooked, my phone in my lap, when a message arrived from Theo, a photo of a design piece he had just finished, with a simple question asking what I thought. I typed back 3 sentences before I put the phone down. Then Daniel came back from the stove, and I angled the screen away before he could see it. It was the first time I had done that. I told myself it meant nothing, that I was simply keeping something uncomplicated from becoming a conversation I did not have the energy for. I was already wrong, and I already knew it somewhere below the level of the words I was using to explain it to myself, and I picked up my coffee anyway. Daniel set a plate down in front of me and asked if I had slept all right. It was a logistical question. The same question he asked when he noticed I was quiet, the tool he reached for when he sensed a gap and did not know how to cross it any other way. I said I was fine. He nodded and went back to the stove. I had a story at work, a difficult client, a small professional victory that had taken 3 weeks of careful positioning. And I started telling it to him with the animation I used in social settings, the version of myself that filled a room. He listened. He said that was great. He did not ask a follow-up question. I stopped in the middle of a sentence and said, "Never mind. It was not that interesting." He said, "No. Tell me." I said it was fine. I picked up my phone. I opened Theo's photo again and added 2 more sentences to my reply. That evening I told Daniel I was going to dinner with some friends from work. He asked which restaurant. I named one. He said he would leave the light on. He did not ask who was going. I had a secondary answer ready in case he did, and the fact that he didn't ask settled somewhere in my chest in a way I called confirmation. confirmation that he did not care enough to wonder. I drove to that dinner with Theo's last message still open on my phone, and I remember thinking, as I pulled out of the parking garage, that the thing about a man who never raises his voice is that you can never be sure if he is at peace or already halfway out the door. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday evening, I met Theo and a group of people at Piccolo Wine Bar, 4 blocks from our apartment. I told Daniel the dinner would run until 9:30. I came home at 11:15. When he looked up from the couch and said he had been starting to wonder, I told him traffic from that part of town was always bad on Thursdays. He said the restaurant was 8 minutes away. I said I had taken the long way. He said okay, and I went to brush my teeth. And in the bathroom mirror, I told myself that the fact he had tracked the distance meant he was checking up on me, and that the checking up was the actual problem here, not the 11:15. The next morning, he found a tagged photo on a mutual friend's post. It had gone up at 10:47, showing me at Piccolo with a group that included Theo, and a mutual friend had tagged Daniel in it by accident. He came to me with his phone and asked, using Theo's name, whether Theo had been at the dinner. His voice was level. He held the phone at an angle so I could see the timestamp. He said he did not need to know everyone I spent time with, but that he did need me not to misrepresent where I had been, and that if I said 9:30 and a photo showed 10:47, that was a gap he was going to ask about. Then he said something that genuinely surprised me. He said that if I needed more social time, more space of my own, he was open to that conversation, and he asked if we could talk about what I actually needed from the marriage right now. He asked it carefully, like a man who had been rehearsing fairness for days. I told him that was exactly why people found it hard to talk to him. I said he turned every simple thing into an interrogation, and that I was not going to justify my social life to someone who tracked timestamps on mutual friends' posts. I said his calmness while asking felt clinical, not concerned, and that there was a difference. I left the room. He did not follow me, and his not following felt like confirmation of everything I had been quietly building a case around, that he was not the kind of man who came after you, who needed you back in the room, who felt the shape of your absence. I filed it next to the 4 days he had once gone without telling me he was passed over for a promotion he had been working toward for 3 years. I had learned about it from a colleague at a work event who assumed I already knew, and I had smiled correctly and come home to find Daniel already in bed. He had said he hadn't wanted to make it my problem. That was the night I stopped feeling like his partner and started feeling like someone he was managing carefully from a comfortable distance, and the worst part was that he never knew those 4 days were the turning point, because I never said it out loud, because saying it out loud would have required me to admit how badly it had hurt. Theo did not pursue me in any obvious way. He was not that kind of person. What he did was simpler and more effective. He was present in a way that had no agenda attached to it. At the dinner that night, he had asked her what frustrated her about her job, and then asked a second question about her first answer. He remembered a comment she had made at a client meeting 6 weeks earlier and brought it back casually, just to say he had been thinking about it. He looked at her like she had just said something interesting, and he looked at her that way before she had said anything at all. That was the mechanism. Not desire, not drama. Just the sustained experience of being followed as a person rather than accommodated as a presence. And after 8 months of feeling like the latter, the former was almost unbearably good. She did not sleep with Theo that night or for some time after. What she did was keep the conversations secret. That was the choice. Not a single dramatic moment, but a sustained daily decision to keep a door closed that should have been open, and to frame the closing as self-protection rather than deception. She drove home from Piccolo through the parking garage and sat in the car for 9 minutes before going upstairs, and she knew in the specific way you know things you are not ready to act on, that she was already somewhere she was not supposed to be. My closest friend Kendra had been at the Piccolo dinner. She had seen Theo and me sit slightly closer than the rest of the group, and she had said nothing then and said nothing after. Kendra was afraid that naming what she saw would make me recalibrate, and she was also, though she would not have used this language, living through me at a careful remove she called loyalty. She had her own version of the restlessness I had. She had been too afraid to do anything with hers. Watching me do something with mine was the closest she had come to it, and she was not willing to give that up by telling me to stop. That is not an excuse for Kendra. It is an explanation, and the difference between those two things matters. 3 days after the photo conversation, I came home to find Daniel had reorganized the hall closet. My coats were on a different section of the rail. He had made space on his side for work gear. He said he needed more room. He said it easily without any weight in his voice, and walked away before I could respond. I stood in the hallway looking at the shifted hangers and felt something that I immediately converted into irritation, because irritation was easier to manage than the thing underneath it. I called Kendra that night and said he was moving things. She asked what that meant. I said I did not know. But I did know. The closet was a small logistical act, and I had understood it immediately as something else, and the understanding was the part I could not admit to yet. The rooftop gathering was my idea. A friend's birthday, 8 people, 2 tables pushed together at a bar called Elspeth's on a Friday night. There were string lights strung between metal poles above the tables and portable space heaters positioned between the chairs, the kind that hummed faintly and kept your face warm while your arms went cold. Theo was there. Kendra was there. A mutual friend named Owen Chen sat at the far end of the table with a quiet drink and said very little, the way he always did, in a manner that you could mistake for disengagement until you remembered he was the person who always knew exactly what had happened after the fact. And at a separate cluster of tables 12 feet away, her back mostly toward our group, was Alicia Rowe, Daniel's older sister, there with colleagues from her architecture firm. I did not notice her until it was already too late. By then, it did not matter in any practical sense. Earlier that day, I had packed the Lisbon mug in my bag. Daniel had brought it back from a work conference in Portugal 2 years ago, because I had mentioned once, in passing, that I wanted to visit Lisbon someday. He had not made a thing of it. He set it on the counter when he unpacked, said he had thought of me, and that was it. I had been using it every morning since without thinking about where it came from. I brought it to Elspeth's to use for tea before the wine started, and I had set it on the low railing beside my chair. The conversation at the table was easy and warm for the first hour. Then someone mentioned Daniel. Jamie said that Daniel was so low-key, meaning it as a compliment, meaning he was the kind of husband who did not crowd his wife. I said low-key was one word for it. The table shifted. Kendra made eye contact with me across the empty glasses in a way that was asking me to stop. I did not stop. I said I had been spending time with Theo lately and I gestured toward him. Theo looked uncertain in a way I chose not to register. And I said that Daniel had not once questioned it, not once asked a direct question, not once shown any sign that it bothered him. I said I had practically set it up to see if he would react. I said I had wanted a reaction. I said that a man who watches his wife spend time alone with another man and says nothing is not being secure. He is being something else, and I used the word weak. And I said that real men did not simply let that happen. I was not shouting. My voice was even. I was performing the version of myself that knew things, and the performance was the loudest thing in the room. At the adjacent table, Alicia stopped moving. She did not turn around. Her colleague kept talking and she kept nodding, but she picked up her phone and without making a decision about it, started a voice memo. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. She would listen to it twice before she went to sleep that night. Daniel arrived at 11 exactly, which was when I had told him to come. He came up the stairs from the street, found the table, and stood at the edge of the group. He had arrived at the tail end of what I had been saying, and the table knew it. And the table went slightly quiet in the specific way that people go quiet when someone enters a room that has been talking about them. He stood there for 4 seconds. Then he walked around to the back of my chair, picked up my jacket, and held it out toward me. He did not look at Theo. He did not look at Jamie. He looked at me, and his expression was not anger. It was not humiliation, not wounded pride, nothing theatrical. It was the face of a man who has just moved an internal piece to a new square and intends to say nothing about it tonight. I called that face blank. It was not blank. I know what it was now. I took the jacket and made a comment to the table about how he had shown up right on time. At least, a small joke that got a short, uncomfortable laugh from Jamie and nothing from Owen. As I stood, my arms swept wide toward the group in a goodbye gesture and passed near the low railing. The Lisbon mug wobbled. It tipped a few degrees and then settled back. I did not notice it. Daniel did. He watched it wobble, watched it find its balance, and said nothing. Later, I would think about the specific restraint required to watch something wobble and say nothing, and I would understand that it was not indifference. It was a man who had been practicing restraint for months and had gotten very good at it. In the stairwell, coming down to the street, the overhead light was narrow and yellow, and I saw his face in it properly for the first time that evening. There was something in it that made me want to stop walking. The feeling was specific, not fear, not guilt, but something closer to recognition, the way you recognize a room you have not been in for a long time. The feeling lasted approximately 5 seconds. On the street, I made a comment about the cold, and he did not answer, and I filled the silence all the way to the car with words about the evening, about the birthday, about Jamie's new haircut, and he drove, and I held my jacket in my lap, and the only sound he made the entire drive home was putting the car in park. In the apartment bathroom, 10 minutes after we got home, I called Kendra and said that he had driven me home without a single word and asked what that told her. She said she did not know. I said it told her everything. I said a man who could hear what I said tonight and say nothing on the drive home did not care enough to fight, and that was the entire point. She said okay. She said okay again. 40 minutes after I fell asleep, Daniel sent Alicia a text that said only that he wanted to talk tomorrow. She replied yes. She had already listened to the recording twice and saved it to a second location. The Sunday lunch at Daniel's parents' house was the kind of meal that looks like normal family life from the outside and feels, from the inside, like walking across a floor you are not sure will hold. The table was full, his parents at each end, Alicia and her daughter beside the window, a visiting cousin, the predictable noise of too many dishes, and everyone talking over the serving spoons. I brought a specific tart his mother liked from a bakery on her side of the city. I asked his father about a renovation project he had mentioned the previous month. I performed the role of good daughter-in-law with total technical precision. What I could not entirely manage was the 10 minutes before dessert, when Daniel and Alicia excused themselves from the table, and I sat watching the hallway they had disappeared into, making conversation with his mother about nothing, while one part of my attention stayed trained on that empty hallway like a sensor. What happened in that hallway? Alicia played a portion of the recording with the sound turned low. She told him about the screenshots she had been holding since the week the Piccolo photos appeared. Saved because something about the composition of the group in those photos had registered to her as specific. She was not there to give him advice or to steer the outcome. She was there because he was her brother and she had information he needed. She had been called too sensitive at a family dinner 18 months ago. She had raised a concern about something Mara had said and been waved off and never received an apology. And she had a long memory without being a vengeful person. She gave him what she had. He thanked her. He said he was handling it. He said it the way someone says a thing when the decision attached to it is already made. After lunch, the group moved to the sitting room and I went to find him. He was in the garage with the side door open, sitting in the front seat of his car, feet on the driveway, doing nothing. No phone, no project, no task. Just a man sitting very still with the garage light off and the afternoon light coming in from outside, doing the kind of arithmetic that has no clean answer. I stood at the door and watched him for 30 seconds. He did not know I was there. He looked exactly like someone whose marriage was becoming a past tense thing and who had not yet finished grieving it. The look on his face was not strategy. It had no performance in it at all. I watched it for 30 seconds and then walked back inside and told his mother the tart had travelled well. 2 days later, I told Kendra that Daniel had been sulking in the garage to make me feel guilty. I chose that interpretation specifically because the true one was not something I could hold for long. That evening at home, I sat him down and told him I had been thinking about things. I said I understood that the time I had been spending with Theo could look a certain way and that I wanted to be transparent about it. I said I valued our marriage and that I would create more distance if that was what he needed from me. I said the word transparent and the word distance and the word needed, all of which were the vocabulary of honesty arranged in the service of management. He listened to the entire thing without interrupting. He said okay. He did not say thank you. He did not say I believe you or I am relieved. He said okay, got up, and put the kettle on. I stayed on the couch feeling that I had contained the situation. I had not contained anything. I had given him one more data point and called it a gesture. 4 days after that conversation, I came home to find the spare room door closed and his laptop, charger, and a labelled stack of project folders on the other side of it. He was at the desk working. He said he needed a quieter space for a big project. He said it without looking up, without any tension, in the same matter-of-fact tone he used to tell me the grocery order was coming at 2. I said okay, and closed the door. I stood in the hallway and held the door handle for a moment after letting go of it, and then I called Kendra from the bathroom and said he had moved his things. She asked if it was for work. I said that was what he said. There was a pause that had more information in it than either of us put into words. I said it was fine. I said it twice. On Friday morning, he left early. I used his laptop to print a document because mine was at the office. The browser history was open to a tab from 3 weeks prior. A search for family law consultation, initial appointment, with a specific firm name below it. I looked at it for 4 seconds. Then I decided it was connected to Alicia's separation proceedings, because Daniel had helped her with paperwork during her own divorce and it was a reasonable enough explanation to function as a door I could close. I shut the laptop and printed from my phone instead. I did not mention it to Kendra. I did not mention it to anyone. I told myself the explanation was probably correct, and I held that probably very carefully for the rest of the day. That evening, a message came from an unknown number. It said, "This is Owen. I was at the rooftop last week, and I think you should know that Alicia was there too." 8 words that rearranged everything. I put the phone face down without responding. I looked at the closed spare room door. For the first time in 6 months, the texture of what I was feeling changed. It was no longer the anxiety of wanting something just out of reach. It was the anxiety of watching something you still have begun to move away, and the terrible clarity of being able to see it happening and not knowing how to make yourself reach for it. I opened a text to Theo and started typing before I had decided what I wanted to say. Theo was at the Alderton Hotel for a 3-day design conference, and he messaged on Tuesday morning asking if I wanted to meet for a drink. Just to catch up. No pressure, he said, in the easy way he said most things. I told myself I would stay for 1 drink and be home before 9. I arrived at 7. The lobby bar was hotel warm and low lit, the kind of place where everything feels slightly insulated from whatever is happening outside it. And Theo was already at a corner table with 2 menus and his jacket over the back of his chair. He asked how I was doing before I had sat down, and he asked it like the answer genuinely mattered to him, and I let that be enough reason to stay. At 9:15, I sent Daniel a message saying I was staying at Kendra's, that it had been a long day that I would explain. I sent it while Theo was at the bar. I watched the screen go dark after the message sent and held the phone in my lap for a moment. I was not confused about what I was doing. The clarity of it was the worst part. I was making a deliberate choice with both hands and then setting it down carefully, like something I planned to pick up later, in a quieter moment, when I had better words for it. At 10 o'clock that evening, Daniel called Kendra's apartment landline. Kendra was not home. Her husband Greg answered. Greg said she had not been in since the afternoon and offered to have her call Daniel back. Greg said it cheerfully, with no idea that the call meant anything at all. Daniel thanked him and hung up. He had his answer. He sat with it for the rest of the night without calling me, without sending a follow-up message, without doing any of the things a person does when they are reacting. He had stopped reacting. He was in a different mode entirely by then. And I did not understand what that mode looked like until I walked through the apartment door the next morning. I came home at 7:40 with the prepared story ready. Kendra had needed me. My phone had gone flat. I had meant to call. I opened the door and Daniel was at the kitchen table already dressed for work, his coffee half finished in front of him, both hands around the mug. Not on his phone, not doing anything except sitting there with a quality of stillness that was different from his ordinary stillness. It was the stillness of someone who has been awake for a long time, who has used those hours for something specific, and who is now simply waiting for the next part to begin. He said Greg's name. He said Greg had answered when he called last night, and that Greg had mentioned Kendra had not been home since the afternoon, and he said it the way someone recounts facts they intend to use later. Precisely, without emphasis, without blame in his voice. Then he told me that he knew the marriage had not been easy lately and that he had not been easy to reach, and that was a real thing he was acknowledging, a real concession, said without performance. He said he was willing to go somewhere together, to sit with someone neutral and figure out what had happened between them, but that he needed me to give him one true thing first, one honest sentence. He said if I could do that, he was still in this room. His voice was level and he meant every word of it. And I know now that it cost him something to say and that the cost was visible to anyone paying attention. I said finally. I said so now you have feelings. I said it with a smile that was the cruelest thing in the scene, and I knew it was cruel while I was doing it, and I did it anyway, because cruelty felt safer than what he was asking me for. I said I was not going to debrief my whereabouts for someone who had spent 3 years being emotionally inaccessible, and that his calmness over the past months had been its own form of abandonment, and that I was not the only one who had checked out of this marriage. The last part was close enough to true that it felt like a weapon I had the right to use. I told him the conversation was over. I went to the bedroom and closed the door. I heard him, from behind the door, finish his coffee. The sound of the mug going down on the table had a finality to it, a sound I had heard 10,000 times that suddenly meant something different. Then he picked up his phone and spoke quietly to someone on the other end, telling them he was ready to move forward with the next step and that he could come in on Thursday. His voice had nothing in it, no anger, no satisfaction, no grief. It was the voice of a man who had finished one kind of thinking and begun another, and I sat on the edge of the bed and understood, with complete clarity, that the conversation at the kitchen table had been the last one. Not the last argument, the last real conversation. I had been given it, and I had used it as a surface to push against, and now it was gone. In the 3 days that followed, he went about the apartment on his ordinary schedule. Groceries on Wednesday, laundry folded on Thursday, the spare room organized in a way that was different from before, labeled and sorted and prepared for movement. He was not cold toward me. He was present and functional and completely unreachable, and the combination was worse than anger would have been. On Friday, I came home to a handwritten note on the kitchen table. He had moved personal items to Alicia's. He said I should expect a call early the following week to arrange a scheduled meeting. The note was signed with his first name only, the way you sign a note to someone you are no longer sure how to address. I read it twice standing at the table. I called Theo. His phone rang 6 times and went to voicemail. I stood in the kitchen for a while after that, holding my phone, not calling anyone else. He texted on Sunday asking if I could come to a meeting Tuesday at 11 to speak with a neutral third party about next steps. I told Kendra I was fairly sure it was a mediation session, that he probably wanted to talk through some things in a structured way, and that I was planning to be open but realistic about what was possible. I dressed as if the outfit could change something. I arrived 2 minutes early, which I have always done in situations where I need to feel like I am in control of at least the timing. The building did house a mediation practice. It was on the 3rd floor. The 2nd floor was different. I did not register the difference until the woman at the table introduced herself as Ms. Patricia Vance and explained her role clearly and without softening it. Daniel was already seated across from me. There was a folder on the table in front of my chair. Ms. Vance said she was there to formally serve me with a petition for dissolution of marriage, and she outlined the temporary orders included with the filing: exclusive apartment possession, separation of the joint accounts pending division, and a financial cut-off date. She named the date of the first preliminary hearing 31 days from today. Then she slid the folder across the table with the practiced ease of someone who has done this for 19 years and has seen every version of this expression before. I looked at Daniel. He did not look away, and he did not speak, and he did not, at any point during the next several minutes, look like someone who was doing something to me. He looked like someone who had arrived at the only logical conclusion of a sequence of events and had taken care to document it properly. I opened the folder. 3 time-stamped photographs from the tagged social post. A digital audio file, 3 minutes and 40 seconds. A signed written statement from Kendra. A keycard access log from the Alderton Hotel, the night I had said I was at her apartment. There was no item in that folder that had not come from something I had done or said or chosen. Every piece of it was mine. He told me, when I asked if he was serious, that yes, he was, and that everything in the folder was in order. Those were the only words he spoke in that room. What arrived in the silence after I closed the folder was not guilt and not apology and not the clean feeling of a lesson learned. What arrived was the specific, unwelcome understanding that I had spent 6 months engineering a situation designed to prove I was worth fighting for, and that in doing so I had handed him every tool he needed to leave cleanly. I thought his stillness was the sound of someone checking out. It was the sound of someone making records. I thought his calm was absence. It was preparation. I thought I was running a test. I was building a case, and he was the one who filed it. Closure snapshot. The temporary orders gave Daniel exclusive possession of the apartment, and I had 30 days to find alternative housing. The 1-bedroom I found was on the 3rd floor of a building 12 minutes away, smaller than our spare room, accessed by a staircase with no elevator, and it required a deposit that meant calling my mother, a call I had been putting off for 2 years for reasons I did not examine closely. Kendra called 4 days after the mediation meeting. She said she was sorry for her part in it, and that she had not known how to say something earlier, and that she understood if I needed space. The conversation was careful and ended without resolution, and neither of us mentioned when we would talk again. Theo's final message came 9 days after the papers were served. He said he had not realized things were this complicated and that he needed time to process. He sent it at 11 in the morning. I read it in the parking lot of my new building and sat in the car afterward, not going anywhere, just sitting. The message after that was a link to a podcast episode he thought I might like. I did not open it. I did not respond. I put my phone in my bag and carried a box up 3 flights of stairs. 2 people removed themselves quietly from the shared group chat. Owen stayed. He sent one message that said he hoped I was okay. He did not ask what had happened. He already knew. The Lisbon mug was still in the kitchen cabinet when I packed the last of my things from the apartment. I opened the cabinet, saw it sitting there with the faded map on the handle side, and closed the cabinet. I did not take it. I did not leave it out on the counter to be noticed. I just closed the door on it and carried a different box to the car. What I believed: that a man who does not fight for you does not love you enough to keep you, and that stillness is the first stage of disappearing. What it cost me: the one person who removed the cilantro every time without being asked, who was within 4 minutes of every single thing he ever promised, and who, when I gave him a reason to leave, left with documentation and a court date and not one raised voice. The door did not slam. It just closed. Those are different things. I know that now.